Watch this.
Idaho's Parental Rights Act got a bit of an upgrade this last legislative session, but that upgrade might mean uncertainty when it comes to protection from sexual abusers, something law enforcement isn't too happy about either. The ITD lawsuit? Tossed. Apparently it takes two to tango and also make a sale in the state of Idaho, which is why the agency's State Street campus is still owned by the state.
We decided to truly stay true to who we are, the Caldwell Night Rodeo, and that's a rodeo.
And they've been doing that for 100 years, a number they are celebrating because, well, they just learned about it. In that time, though, they've also learned to stick to the basics. Parental rights. It's been a rallying cry we heard grow louder during the COVID pandemic. As a parent, I have the right to not have my child wear a mask, right? Or get a vaccine. And in Idaho, those rights are also extended to parents who choose to not have their child receive any sort of medical care, even those who are injured because it goes against their religious beliefs. See the faith healers. And while those same rights are no longer extended to parents of transgender children seeking gender-affirming medical care, the topic of parental rights and medical care were both the focus of a law passed this past legislative session. Senate Bill 1329 was meant to amend Idaho's Parental Rights Act by preventing medical providers from performing medical procedures on kids without their parents' consent. It was described by its sponsor, that'd be Senator Kelly Anthon, as a simple bill.
It simply deals with the ability of parents to make decisions regarding health care and medical procedures for children. It simply says that no health care services to a minor child can be done without obtaining the consent of a parent. Just stop and think about that.
Yeah, just stop and think about that. Problem is, there apparently was a part of that that wasn't thought about, or at least thought about completely. The bill's sponsors, authors, and all the Republican lawmakers who voted for it, and all of them did since it passed right along party lines, well, they didn't want to think about what wasn't in the bill, I guess, because even though it was brought up during debate.
No one is trying to keep secrets from parents, but young adults have a right to seek the kind of assistance they need in the times of help they need. And that's all we're at. That's all I'm asking, is leave this small safety net open.
Those times of health they need, cases of mental health or even incest. That part wasn't thought about apparently because this new law also, I guess the question is, does it protect sexual predators who also happen to be family members? As Democratic Representative Alana Rebel pointed out a few weeks later in the House floor debate, if minor victims weren't already comfortable going to their parents with something like this, like incest, the Parents' Rights and Medical Decision-Making Act wasn't going to make it any easier for them to seek that help. So has this new law posed any sort of problems? Hunter Funk looked into it.
According to the Rape, Abuse, and Incest National Network, every 9 minutes, Child Protective Services found strong evidence of child sexual abuse. Among cases of child sexual abuse reported to law enforcement, 93% of perpetrators are known to the victim. 7% are strangers, 59% are acquaintances, and 34% are family members. It's why something that got overlooked might be a bigger issue. Senate Bill 1329 moved fast in the Senate.
When I originally saw the bill, there wasn't a lot of time to prepare, and that's a real problem in legislative session. We're hit with, bill after bill, and I think last session, more bills on record.
In February, it was introduced and passed the Senate 27-7 within a few days. Proponents of the bill argued that parents need to give consent to allow medical procedures and mental health services for minors.
And who's to determine who's the bad parent who doesn't get to know? That's the problem. And that's the problem this bill is meant to solve, and hopefully solve. This bill doesn't prevent any child from going to get help. You can go get help. This bill doesn't say a child can't go get help. That's not what the bill says. The bill says what I said at the beginning. A parent has a natural right, a fundamental right, to make the decisions for their child regarding health care, medical decisions.
But the question now, and brought up in session, can it unintentionally protect sexual predators who abuse children?
But not every parent is a good parent. They may be the reason a child wants to talk with a medical professional. The child may be experiencing abuse in their home or even incest. Those children are seeking protection from their parents or some other person. It has to be confidential. They need to be able to talk with medical providers in confidence.
The law went into effect on July 1st. Democratic Senator Melissa Wintrow was one of 7 who voted against the bill. She says it's something she's willing to go back and fix if there are unintended consequences.
I think now that it's a law, we see people panicking, and I think the biggest concern is that health care for young adults is going to be in jeopardy and compromised. We need to put egos aside, our opinions, what we think, politically, and really look and center what is happening for our youth. And how do we improve their lives and make sure this law is not having a detrimental effect, whether intended or not?
Even though Governor Brad Little signed the bill, he stated concerns about access to behavioral health and conflicting sections of code. Little said, quote, "I urge all stakeholders to closely monitor any negative consequences this litigation has on our youth accessing the behavioral health supports they need. In the event this bill creates any unintended barriers for adolescent behavioral health care, I expect amendments will be made to address the issue accordingly," end quote. After reaching out to Little as to whether or not there have been issues, we've yet to hear back. Senator Kelly Anthon was the one who sponsored the bill. He said, quote, "When I heard Senate Bill 1329 could have the unintended consequences of affecting investigations of serious crimes against children, I contacted the Idaho State Police. I spoke directly with Colonel Williams. He was unaware of any issues but promised to get me in contact with another department of his to make sure. Obviously, if that is an unintended consequence of the bill, we will make changes accordingly. We spoke to the Idaho State Police. In the case where a minor needs a sexual assault or rape kit test, it's out of their hands."
The actual physical evidence collection and the medical treatment is going to happen locally. It's going to happen in these communities around Idaho.
Local law enforcement and hospitals are the ones having to follow the law because they administer the kits. ISP just handles the lab results. When we reached out to the hospitals, St. Luke's didn't have a clear answer given the newness of the law. And St. Alphonsus didn't have anyone to comment on the issue. As for local law enforcement, Boise Police says, quote, "Investigators have tools and procedures in place to address a variety of circumstances over the course of investigations involving victims of all ages. The Boise Police Department will continue to serve victims in our community in accordance with state law." BPD didn't say if there was an issue, but Meridian Police thinks there is, saying, quote, "Law enforcement is very concerned this law will allow children to continue to be victimized with no recourse. We know at times kids are abused by family members and, yes, parents, so we know this creates a huge obstacle when trying to stop some of our child sex predators." Now, it is important to note that if you or someone you know has been sexually assaulted and is in crisis, to call the number on your screen. It is National Sexual Assault Hotline. Let me give it to you, 800-656-4673. You know, the big question here is if this is going to be an issue for minors, right? And after going through a traumatic situation, we're kind of dealing with trying to figure out the answer. Nobody really knows what's going on.
And there seems to be a lot of ambiguity, kind of like with the new abortion laws, where the doctors, well, we don't know how to handle it yet. We haven't seen the cases yet, or we're just not knowing about it.
Yeah, and that was one of my big questions, right, for police officers or hospitals. Like, is there this fine line where, you guys can step in and kind of change that? But there's no clear answer yet.
Senator Anthon mentioned there is a discussion, or there's language in there that protects against parents that are the abusers or whatever. But that has to do with documents and medical records. Like, you cannot refuse records to a parent with this new law, where before a 14-year-old and above had to sign off and say, yes, my parents can look at my medical records. This changes that. But it says if that parent is under an investigation, then that can be refused. But if without the rape kit or without anybody saying there's an accusation, there's no investigation.
Exactly.
So, okay, there's a lot of gray area there. All right. Thank you very much, Hunter. Well, the legal effort to force the sale of ITD's State Street campus was thrown out of court this week. Idaho Supreme Court, to be exact, with justices unanimously dismissing the lawsuit, basically saying the plaintiffs had no standing because, well, there was no signing. Quick recap. A group of developers were the highest bidders on the Idaho Transportation Department's building and property on the corner of State Street and Whitewater Park Boulevard in Boise. That building was being sold because, well, it was old and no longer being used by the agency after a pipe burst, flooding it back in January of 2022. That campus was declared surplus a few months later, and Idaho's Department of Administration started shopping it around. And then, well, when they saw that no other state agency wanted it, that is when the Hawkins companies, Pacific West Communities, and FJ Management got together and put together a winning bid of nearly $52 million. And it seemed like it was a done deal, an agreed upon deal, by March of this year. Except that's also when the ITD budget was brought up in JFAC, and it contained a line item to block that sale. Lawmakers believed it was best to just keep that property and renovate the building for $32.5 million. Ultimately, after some procedural back and forth, the sale was blocked by the legislature when they passed the new budget. So the scorned buyers, that'd be Hawkins, Pacific West, and FJ, filed a lawsuit against the state of Idaho in April, calling the reneging on the sale, quote, unconstitutional interference. But just before they were to hear those oral arguments, the Supreme Court tossed it out because, well, there was never a binding contract. So they didn't have a legal right to the property or to sue, something that was brought up the day the Senate was debating the budget on the final days of the session.
The next page, which is the last page, is empty. There is no signature. There is no public, no notary public. There is nothing on it. That signature is for the state of Idaho. There is no deal.
The companies, the buyers signed it, but Idaho did not. So no signature, no sale. The buyers believe, though, the legislative process to block that deal, or no deal, was flawed, which is why they filed the lawsuit. But the Supreme Court made it clear their opinion did not decide that issue, whether the process was legal or not. Today, Hawkins companies, they say they're disappointed, and they said it sends a clear message. Don't do business with Idaho. And the lawmakers that interfered in the free market and voted for lost revenue for the state, they said, should be held accountable by taxpayers. All right, compared to the rest of the country, historically, Idaho is either at or near the bottom of the list when it comes to state funding for public education. The state formula for how public schools are funded looked a bit different before the pandemic than it was during. And now, in this post-COVID era, schools are poised to receive less money than they did the last few years because of a return to that prior formula. Today being the first day of school for thousands of Idaho students, well, Aspen Schumpert took a look at the funding formula and how it might relate to test scores as well.
Yeah, Brian, and I think it's fair to say this is a new era when it comes to public education funding. Before the pandemic, Idaho public schools were funded on an average daily attendance. Then when COVID hit, the formula changed and schools were receiving funds on enrollment-based formula. Sonia Galavis, who is a state representative on the education committee, but also a teacher of 20 years, favored the enrollment funding we had during COVID. She says it gave schools a significant funding increase.
They could have more clear and predictable budgets because they knew how many kids were enrolled in their district, so they knew what the funding was going to be.
The formula is back to attendance-based funding. It resorted back to that formula at the start of the 2023 school year. Today, schools entered the second year with the funding formula, and Galavis says going back to attendance-based funding, we saw tens of millions of dollars of reductions in our schools across the state.
No matter who is gone on a daily basis in my classroom, I still have to keep the lights on. I still have to be there. I still need all the materials. We still need all the professionals and educators who are meeting the needs of the school at large. And so we don't see a reduction of cost, even though we're being funded less than enrollment.
This is also a time school districts are failing to pass levies, some districts having to close schools and reduce staff. So if we're spending less money than other states on public education, does that also mean our test scores are low? Not quite, and I'm going to answer that question going over test scores and funding them out for you tonight on the News at 10. Brian.
It's interesting, so if I remember this correctly, I think it is an average, on average, 10% of students are absent on a daily basis across all schools. So that would mean if it's based on funding versus enrollment, they're getting less than they would be if it was just enrollment.
Yeah, that's right, and something that Sonia and I actually talked about, and you'll hear a little bit more about tonight.
Excellent, looking forward to it. Thanks, Aspen. We're taking a look back at the 100 years of the Caldwell Night Rodeo, even though they almost didn't realize they were that old. I guess that's what happens at that age. All right, this is the part of the show where we want to hear from you. Talk to us about anything, what we've talked about or what you want us to talk about. Text us, 208-321-5614. And as always, include your name and the hashtag #the208. Now, the Caldwell Night Rodeo is just about 2.5 hours away from its second night of its 100th year of entertaining rodeo fans. 100 years is a big milestone. However, their centennial celebration almost slipped by them. It wasn't until about 4 years ago, when the world was covered in an uncertain cloud of the coronavirus, that they caught it. Not the Rona, but the details. COVID was kind of a nerve-wracking time, especially in those early days, paying attention to the daily count, not knowing what was open or not. Can we even get together for holidays? It was a lot. And a lot of things happened to a lot of people during the pandemic. Caldwell Night Rodeo, it aged 11 years in a matter of weeks, but it wasn't from stress. For decades, the Caldwell Night Rodeo has dazzled bucking and barrel fans under the lights. But exactly how many decades? Well, that took a shutting of the chutes in the summer of 2020, a pandemic pause, if you will, for office staff to realize how old they really were.
Well, they discovered that the rodeo actually started in 1924.
100 years ago, Caldwell's cavalry unit needed $18,000 to build suitable stables for their horses. So why not use other horses and bulls to pay for it? And the Caldwell Gymkhana and Rodeo was born. Fair weather made for a first-year success, with 1,500 people showing up at the Armory grounds that first day. By 1935, they brought in lights, becoming one of the first to do so. And things were going well. Well, until the 1960s.
We saw the success of a lot of the other rodeos of bringing big names in for entertainment.
Big names like the likes of Lassie, who they brought in 1964. Then came 1965, a year to celebrate their move to their current arena.
That year they brought in Patty Page.
How much is that dog in the window?
The cost would be a big concern after they also moved the 5-day event back to June.
And so they brought her in, and it was a total rainout. That's the year that we actually went bankrupt.
Oh, they paid Patty, but they were left $26,000 in the hole. And by the next year, organizers decided to move back to August and get back to the rodeo roots.
And that's where the whole tagline is, we're not going to bring in all these stars, but Caldwell Night Rodeo, the Cowboys are the stars.
And it's been that way with the CNR since.
Everyone asks, what are you doing special for the 100 year? We're having a rodeo. That's what we're doing. And the Cowboys and Cowgirls are still the stars.
Well, these days, the Caldwell Night Rodeo is part of the Professional Rodeo Cowboys Association circuit and consistently ranked in the top 24 pro rodeos. You may be wondering when the Rowdies and the Civvies rivalry came along. Those characterizations were coined by longtime arena announcer Randy Corley. like 40 years ago, to drum up some fun for the fans. He's still there, by the way. Back then, he noticed the fans sitting in the sun on the east side drank a little more beer than those sitting in the shady side on the west side. So he dubbed them the Rowdies. Caldwell Night Rodeo continues tonight with the Man Up Crusade. Fans are encouraged to wear purple to take a stand against domestic violence. And the rodeo runs through Saturday.
I am thrilled to tell you that today we're talking about temperatures below the typical average high for this time of year, upper 80s in valley locations and towards the mid 70s in the mountains and lower 80s over in the Magic Valley, and some pretty decent air quality on top of that. We've seen a lot of clearing throughout some of this morning and afternoon hours. In some spots, you can see this view over towards the Donnelly area and Tamarack. Big difference from this morning to this afternoon, but you can see those fires that are burning still in the distance. And we did see a little bit of more smoke in some of those western Treasure Valley spots because of some regional wildfire smoke moving in from California. But tomorrow, the risks change a little bit more, so get a little bit more inclement as we expect thunderstorms to move across the region once again. So the areas of the highest fire danger are outlined in this pink, where there's a fire weather warning in place, and this will go into effect midnight tonight until 9 p.m. on Thursday. And I just want to show you that it does not include McCall, and it looks like it doesn't include Cascade, but it does to all of the areas to the east. So a lot of those mountain areas we'll be looking at for tomorrow for some of that risk, and also a lot of eastern Oregon. A lot of that pink was covering eastern Oregon. We have a chance of some light showers in the very early morning hours in the Treasure Valley spots, but you can see the thunderstorm activity ramping up in the afternoon and evening hours. And then after that, we do see things clear out.
All right, about a minute left on this Wednesday edition of the 208. Let's get to some of the comments and even some of the questions you sent in during today. This one from Tracy and Cuna. It'd be nice, if someone in the legislature actually read some of these bills and hopefully understood what was written before they willy-nilly passed them. That's been the sentiment of a lot of people. Lawmakers are in denial, says Jen. Perfect families do not exist. Growing up in Boise in the 80s, I needed help that I could not discuss with my single mom. Access to health care saved my life. There's a lot of that out there that sometimes they need to consider, but that's kind of been the trend in our lawmaking recently. Comes to, well, telling you what you can and can't do when it comes to health care. Am I missing something? If you have public property that no state, county, city wants, and you have a $50 million offer, $52 million, and decide to spend $30 million to improve, isn't that over $80 million we lose and no one wants it? That's good math there, Tom and Meridian. That's kind of the question a lot of people had with that one going into, as we round up the legislative session. With the most restrictive abortion law, the lowest funded schools, and some of the lowest average wages and highest home prices in the nation, why would any family really want to move to Idaho? Asks Steve. I don't know. Air quality? Hey, no, not this. Nope, can't be that. Ice cream potato. That's what it is. See you tomorrow.